welcome. You're tuned into the best in true crime talk radio. This is True Crime Tuesday. I'm your host, Dave Schrader. Along with me, as always, Tim Dennis. Hello, Tim.
Hello there.
Listen, man, I got a big announcement to make. This is something that has been about a year and a half in the making. We did an episode, I think 2 years ago, maybe 3 now, to be honest with you. People always want to know why I'm so fascinated with true crime. So we dug into the story of my friend Deb and her 2 children that were murdered. It was a heinous case, just absolutely horrific. If you lived in Illinois 25 years ago, you remember the case of Deborah Evans, where her ex-boyfriend and his cousin and cousin's boyfriend came to visit Deb, shot her, stole her unborn baby, then murdered 2 of her other kids. They were apprehended, I think, within a couple days. We told that story, and it was a very emotional episode to do. You know, even after 22 years, it was tough to talk about. But the damnedest thing happened, Tim.
What's that?
I actually got contacted by somebody who has ties to this case and wants to see justice for Deb, which I thought, oh, okay. You know, when they approached me that way, it's certainly an interesting topic. And then I found out that she's the daughter of one of the killers. And she reached out to me and wrote a pretty compelling little email to me and just asked that I just remain open to what she had to say. And of course, if there is another side to the story, I would like to explore it. And I've always been curious because there was somebody else that young Joshua talked about that was at the murder that has never been brought up, and there is no arrest for him. So I thought maybe this woman had some insight into it. She has insight, all right, and she has been working with a reporter in Chicago who's covered this case pretty much, I think, from the beginning. This reporter has uncovered a lot of unusual things, Tim. So we're working on this taking place in a couple of weeks, just in time for the 25th anniversary of Deb's passing. So I'm just going to be honest with you. I don't know how it's going to go. I understand this woman wants a full story said. She wants to be another voice, but she also thinks that Deb's true killer has not yet been revealed. So we're going to talk about that in a couple of weeks on the show, and it'll be a follow-up to that other episode. That other episode does live on our Darkness Radio YouTube page. So if you go to the YouTube page and just scroll down, you'll see the True Crime Tuesday episode there, and it goes in depth. And maybe what we can do, Tim, is, you know, True Crime Tuesday is always released on Tuesday, of course. Maybe we can re-release the original interview on that Monday and then do the follow-up episode on the Tuesday, so people that are listening to the podcast version can hear the first one for reference and then pick up with the second episode on Tuesday. Do you think we could do that?
Sure.
All right. So there'll be a kind of a bonus episode as we do a flashback on that Monday to the episode. And, you know, that I've been very outspoken about the way it went down. I've been very outspoken about justice being served. And I never knew where I would fall on the whole idea of, you know, death sentences for killers and where it would be. I always hoped I would be kind of a forgiving person and understand, you know, to let the law take its course. And in that case, it's been really hard for me because you kind of want to see justice meted out. And it doesn't always happen the way we want it to. But maybe there is a better reason. Maybe these 3 were not put to death for a very good reason. There may not be, or there may be another whole side of this story that has yet to be revealed. And if they were taken out of the equation when they were supposed to have been years ago, this may never have been told, or certainly not had any kind of real impact. So we'll see how this rolls out. I know very little to tell you guys. Just teasing the idea that the show is going to take place in a couple of weeks as a follow-up to an episode I never thought I'd be doing a follow-up to. So keep that in mind. That'll be coming up on around the 16th, I think it is, which coincides with the 25th anniversary of her passing. So we'll talk more about it then. Today, though, we've got Dumb Crimes, Stupid Criminals coming up a little bit later for those of you that are subscribed to the premium aspect of Stitcher. For those of you that are not, you, of course, get our full interview with our guest today, Dr. Bill Kimberlin. His book is called Watch Me Die, Last Words from Death Row. Dr. Kimberlin, welcome to the show. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. It's an honor to be on your show. So thank you very much.
This, what an interesting and fascinating concept for a book, Last Words from Death Row. And as somebody who has a very interesting perspective on this, maybe you can introduce to our audience what was the genesis of this book for you, and how did you have access to these final words?
So I guess kind of like you become curious about certain things. And when I started teaching at the college level, mostly in like abnormal psychology and social psychology, there were a lot of questions asked about the most debatable topics of the time: legalization of drugs, gun laws, abortion rights, and of course, capital punishment. And I always said I would never be one of those professors that would teach book smarts only. So I knew enough about all of the other topics, been to a lot of different countries, and seen a lot of different things. But when it came to capital punishment, I didn't know a whole lot about that. So I decided to do some research. And then I found out that there were very few people that knew a whole lot about capital punishment, the execution process, and that because of it being so non-transparent. And so I made some contacts. I had one of my best friends as a common pleas court judge, and got me the numbers to the Attorney General's office. I was living in Ohio at the time, and made some contacts. They explained to me that it's a very strict laws and procedures that are put in place to make sure that it isn't transparent. But they decided to send me the Ohio Revised Code along with the list of inmates that were going to be executed, and wished me luck. They said, if you find any loopholes, have at it. I decided to reach out to a couple of the inmates, and the next thing you know, they invited me to come to death row. I went there with the intention of just talking to them maybe once or twice so I could feel better about teaching on the subject. They, in turn, told me they knew nothing about the execution process. They were just waiting to get their dates, and invited me to witness their executions. And then from there on, it just mushroomed into all over the country. And that was probably 13 years ago, and here I sit still doing it to this day.
Walk me through what that's like, the concept of, inviting you to be there to be a witness. This is obviously you're going to watch somebody die. What is that like? And is that something that you had to put a lot of thought into, or was it morbid curiosity outweighed all other aspects?
I still think about it to this day, because I think I have another 6 or 8 that I'm scheduled to attend. I think one within the next year by electrocution. And it's a very surreal moment. Actually, it's surreal leading all the way up to it, because I've even had last meals with one of them, and you're sitting there, and it's not like somebody's in hospice care where they are suffering and you want their suffering to end and things like that. These are people that we have real live conversations with. And I try to get inside their mind. They're fully functioning, everything. And then the next moment you see them strapped down to the gurney and watch them actually be killed.
When you have this unique perspective to be there and speak to these people as they're truly about to face their mortality, what is that like, and what is the mindset of most of these people? I always think of the moment from Angels with Dirty Faces, the Humphrey Bogart and James Cagney movie with Pat O'Brien, right?
Sure.
Where he plays this, Jimmy Cagney plays this just ne'er-do-well criminal who kind of befriends the Bowery boys and, is teaching them the illegal means of getting away with things. And at the end, the priest tells him, Rocky, you can't be so strong, man. Show them. You're going to be put to death. Let your life be good for something. Show them what it's like. and that you're afraid. And he said, I'm not going to be afraid. And then in the last few moments of the movie, as they lead him to it, he's got this smug smile on his face, ready to go to the electrocution chair. And then they cut to this really impactful scene of his shadow as he's pulling away from the police, screaming and begging for mercy and to not die. And that news spreads, of course, which then gets to the kids, and hopefully now puts them on a different path, realizing that there is no valor in the kind of work and the crime that they were doing. That was always a deeply impactful scene to me watching that. And you're always left with the question, did he do right by the kids? Or did he face his own mortality in those final moments? And was it terrifying to him? How do most inmates deal with that?
So it's been my experience that the executions that I've witnessed, none of them were remorseful at all. A couple of them were like a deer in headlights as they walk them up to the table where they're strapped down, because they do have to walk up to it. And then they are strapped down, then the IVs are placed in. All of them that I've witnessed to date have been lethal injections. So, it's been where they're brought into the death chamber. They step up on the bed, they're strapped down, and then everything proceeds from there. But no last minute I'm sorry's or confessions or anything of the sort. They're pretty defiant all the way to the end.
Are they defiant because they believe they're truly innocent, or are they defiant because they just have no fear of what's coming for them?
So I think the reason that, and this is just my opinion, that they're so, fixated on being defiant to the end is that they've spent so many years on death row that they've convinced themselves not of their innocence so much, but that the state is no better than they are because they are putting somebody to death. And even though they may have killed, 1, 10, 15, 80 people, whatever, in their mind, they've convinced themselves that the state of Ohio, or any state in that effect, is no better because they're doing the same thing. They're putting somebody to death.
That is the conundrum, right? And to what end? Do we have that legal right? And I know that your book doesn't really cover that aspect of this so much. It's kind of taking this unbiased look at the realities of what death row is like. And I've been curious, Dr. Kimberlin. You talk about how long a lot of these people sit on death row. Once they've been convicted, they've been sentenced to death. I understand there's going to be an appeals process, but why does this stretch out sometimes 20, 30 years before they actually put this person to death?
So that would depend on each individual that's on death row. So, for instance, there are some that like to re-victimize the families out there. So I heard you talking, briefly before about the one young lady that kind of hit you personally with the murders that took place. Some of my guys will sit there and say, we have no intention of ever leaving death row, but what we can do is make that family suffer right along with us. We'll appeal. They have to come in. They have to fight the appeal. They have to relive this moment for 10, 20, 30 years. And in most cases, it's been my experience anyways, that the victim's family members pass away way before they ever get to, in their minds, seek this closure, which is watching that person be executed. And, from a psychological standpoint, that's just pure torture, in my opinion, that they would have to continue to live their life only hoping to see another person put to death, thinking that's going to make them feel better. And then the reality is, if it just keeps them from bringing that closure to them, way, way too late.
So it's sometimes just their psychopathy of wanting to continue to hurt that just keeps motivating them. If the courts know that, why don't they put a stop to it sooner? Realizing that the victim's family shouldn't have to keep having to deal with that.
That whole constitutional due process affords each and every person that that process of the appeals. So when somebody is sentenced to death at the common pleas level, they ought to have automatically have a right to an appeal. So then that starts the process all over to the Court of Appeals, and then it can go up to the state Supreme Court, but then the federal courts take over, and then they have to determine if everything was done properly at the state level, and the wheels of justice grind slowly, so it takes quite a while.
Have you ever been there in front of somebody that's about to be put to death that you believe truly might be innocent of the crime that they're about to pay the ultimate price for?
No, never, not once.
When you're working to kind of get into their head and get an understanding of them, how manipulative are they towards you? Is it just like a cat and mouse game in most cases where they're trying to play you for sympathy or to see you get infuriated? How does that usually work?
So when I first started in on this journey, I had one of my what do you want to call it? One of my rules was that if I was going to talk to you, you had to admit that you were guilty. So that took all those cards right off the table because, and I told him, I'm like, I'm not here to be your personal therapist. I'm certainly not here for legal counsel. If you think that you're wrongfully convicted, then you need to go in a different direction. I'm just here to study the criminal mind, what makes you tick, what brought you here, and what's going to take you off of this death row. So a lot of them respected that right off the bat. And then as my, for lack of a better term, audience grew from death row in Ohio to Florida, California, Texas, federal, and everywhere else, there were a couple that has professed their innocence, and I don't really get into their cases too much. I just get into why they think that way. So, like one that comes to mind that I speak to quite often is Scott Peterson. He's always in the news, and he's maintained his innocence, and I still talk to him. But for the most part, every one of my guys admit that they are guilty. Some of them have confessed other murders to me. So I've worked with the feds on a couple things dealing with bodies and locations. But yeah, they are.
Well, hold on one second. Then, by doing that, is this a calculated gamble they're doing? That if I tell this guy, they're going to spare me a little bit longer because now they've got to look into this case and see if the information lines up, and then. Is that a ploy, or are they legitimately giving you details to try to kind of cleanse their conscience?
None to cleanse their conscience. I can tell you that, with 100% certainty. Other ones, there's been a couple that I've questioned their motives, maybe pulling the old, Ted Bundy routine of, I'll give you the more victims if you take this death penalty off the table. But for the most part, if they're confessing more crimes and they're legitimate, they just don't want to be forgotten. They want to be remembered as being, a notorious serial killer or, the worst of the worst.
But then why wait to that moment to do it? Why not start once a year just releasing names? It's
all about control, respect, and trust. Mm-hmm. And the one thing I've learned doing this for a lot of years now is that you have to have a lot of patience with these guys on death row because they do control the timeline. If they want to talk to you and tell you certain things, it's going to be on their time. And they don't want to give up too much all at once.
I get that to a degree, but it just seems so strange to me. And then the way that the law sometimes deals with that, one of our episodes we did, I want to say it was back in, I think, 2014, because it was just before this man was put to death. Are you familiar with Tommy Lynn Sells?
I heard of the name, never spoke to the man.
Yeah, it was. He was just a bad guy, and during his kind of jailhouse confessions to an author, he actually bragged that, there's one woman sitting on death row for murdering her son, and I'm the one that did it. And he gave her details that this woman actually took and was able to help exonerate this woman and get her off death row. And he said, "Oh, there's a lot more," and they still put him to death within, I think it was within a month of our interview. And I thought, if this guy just owned up to one and it exonerated somebody from death row, why put this guy to death? Because, I understand there's, again, that calculated risk of, is he being Ted Bundy trying to play Hannibal Lecter and I'll help you with other cases or I'll give you insights. Or is he legitimately the answer to all of these other crimes? Because if there's one person on death row for his crimes, how many more? And that didn't seem to interest the law. They just thought, hey, listen, we got him for this. That's good enough. If he did all these other murders, either way, he's still going to death. But they weren't looking at the bigger picture and the scope of the fact that there may be other people that have been found guilty of this crime that they did not commit.
Sure. And if you would have told me that, 10 years ago, I would have never believed it. However, I've experienced that same exact analogy throughout this whole decade of doing it. So, for instance, I have maps right now to 3 different bodies from another serial killer. One in Florida, one in Ohio, 2 in Florida. Same killer. He drew these maps with such consistency and detail that there was a film crew that came over from London, and we went all the way to one of the body sites. Everything he named, everything was there. I spoke to the FBI on it more than once. They gave me questions to ask him to see if it would line up. They did. And unfortunately, nothing ever came about. He even admitted to that there's one guy on Ohio's death row that is innocent because the one he's on death row for, he killed himself. And I have all of this in writing, I have it on tape, everything, and nothing's ever done because of, for lack of a better word, politics. I've found that, some of the same sheriffs or chiefs of police in areas that were there then, they don't want the embarrassment of unsolved crimes being brought back. Well, why didn't you solve this? Why didn't you take care of this? The resources to go and uncover these victims, especially when you tell them that they're prostitutes, and the first thing that comes to their mind is, okay, they're prostitutes, and what comes to my mind is, it was a mother, a daughter, a sister, an aunt. It's a human being. It's, a family that's looking for closure, but none of that seems to really resonate with the authority out there, and it's sad.
It's horrifying. And how many cases do you think you have?
I have, put it this way. The one guy was so upset that we would not uncover those bodies because he was so convinced that they were still there that he's like, until they're dug up, I'm not giving you any more. And then I have another serial killer I'm working with who's, I think he has like 2 more that he wants to give me. But it's, it's baffling to me that, the resources that they will use on trying to find somebody like Jimmy Hoffa, they won't use to actually locate victims of brutal homicide like this.
Just out of curiosity, Doctor, what is so if he said, hey, I buried them at this plot of land, what stops you from contacting the family members and having them pay for it, or at least maybe creating a GoFundMe that would, pay to have these areas dug up and examined?
So the family members is the big issue there, because remember, these are transient prostitutes at the time, because these guys are typically opportunistic in who they abduct, rape, and kill. So family members have no idea, that, their loved one could be here or, there or wherever, So I have no idea. He has no idea who the families were. They're just, prostitutes to him.
But he's just telling you he knows where the bodies are, can set this aside. Is it because, again, they're just people not in high prominence, or do you think it just wouldn't matter anyway because they don't want to look like they didn't do their due diligence when they were talking to this guy and prosecuting him to begin with?
I think more than anything, it's because of the profession that these young ladies were in at the time of prostitution and the way society looks down upon them. And that's horrible for us in this country to even think that way.
Well, let's, take me back to the first case that you went to witness. And did you do anything to have to mentally kind of prepare for what you were about to see and deal with?
Well, yeah, I mean, I had no idea what to expect. So, I couldn't eat or anything the night before or the morning of. I had no idea there were going to be protesters out there, when you cross into the gate. I was seated in a room outside of the death house in the death chamber with the defense attorneys. I was thinking, like you see on TV, they're going to be running around like chickens with their heads cut off, trying to file last minute appeals and everything else. And they're just sitting there, talking about what they had for dinner last night and, what the plans are for the weekend, like it's another day. And I usually never speak to any of them in there. I just sit there by myself and I write a lot of things that are being said. And so then we're led over to the death house, and I was told it was going to take 20 minutes tops, and it ended up taking like 2 hours. The guy had to urinate once, so they let him off the table once to go to the bathroom, and he hopped back on and strapped him back down. I mean, it was I can't even explain what was going through my mind at the time because I was so caught off guard. It's just not anything that I expected.
So is it almost like he was there for a physical and told the doctor, "Oh, I got to run to the bathroom real quick,"
Yes.
And then just came back and hopped up on the table. So of his own volition, or is he,
Yes.
is this like the kids not wanting to go to bed at night? I have to go to the bathroom. I need a glass of water. Is it one of those kind of moments, or was it just all matter of fact?
No, it was matter of fact. And in fact, I guess what shocked me, and I should have known this ahead of time. I just assumed that the staff would be much more prepared. But see, since there's no nurses or doctors that are allowed to participate in an execution process because of the oath that they take, then the staff of the prison, EMTs and people like that, are the ones that are in charge of inserting the IVs and the catheters and things like that. Well, each individual is different when it comes to finding their veins, whether they are, collapsed from years of drug use or obesity or anything of that nature. So it took them a while. They were putting the needles in his neck and his, down by his leg or ankles, in his hands, everything. So when they got the first one in, finally, they still had trouble finding the second port of entry because the state of Ohio requires 2 ports of entry. And so they run a bag of saline to keep that vein open. And that whole bag had run through already before they even found the second vein. So that's what made him have to go to use the restroom. And I'm just sitting there and not knowing what to say, just sitting there watching this transpire in front of me. And
what is the criminal doing or saying during all this? Is he chatterboxing through the whole thing, or is he just silently reserved?
This one was talkative. He was very cooperative with the guards. This was one that actually wanted to be executed. He was not trying to argue anything. And he was very cooperative. He was not combative at all. And it was very, very surreal to see all of this transpire, a couple of feet in front of you. And on top of that, I could see the guards' hands even shaking as they're trying to connect the IVs that go into the wall, because behind the wall is the executioner. You never see the executioner, and you never see the physician that they have on call there to pronounce the individual dead, or in case something were to happen, if the phone would ring on the wall and they needed the crash cart. So the physician is there. You just never see him or the executioner. And, the guards, when they're trying to connect the tubes, one had to hold the other one steady. I mean, it was a very out-of-body experience.
And do they ask him, I mean, is it like the movies? Do you have anything that you want to say before we hit you with the injection? Or how does the last moments play out for these people?
They are, the warden will give, him the opportunity to make the last statement. And some do, some don't. I mean, he had something really weird to say. I could really use a bowl of soup and a chicken bone or something like that right now. Something that made no sense whatsoever. Other ones are pretty defiant. I had one guy who, he wanted to be the next head of the Aryan Brotherhood and wanted to be, Adolf Hitler II and everything else. And 28 years later, when he's strapped down, they give him the opportunity to read off a last statement, and he reads it off in German, which infuriates the survivors and the victims' family members on the other side. So, I mean, it's just you never know what to expect when they're strapped down. Some of them will have this huge thing that they're going to say, but then they decide not to. I had one guy wave at me, and I never wave back or anything. I just sit there stone cold and look straight ahead. So nothing gets reported that way. But yeah, it's just it's an odd feeling to have when you're watching another human being die.
And after your first experience watching this, is it just like they go to sleep? Is it quiet? Is it reserved? How does that look to the observer?
Well, that's what I was led to believe. However, it doesn't always work that way. So the first one that I witnessed, it was a 3-drug cocktail. So it was the sodium pentothal that would render them unconscious. The second drug that would be administered was pancurium bromide, I believe, which is a paralyzation agent. And then the third drug would have been potassium chloride that would stop the heart, or essentially gives you a heart attack. Well, some drugs are fast acting on people, especially when it comes to the physics of how much to deliver into them and things of that nature. So when the paralyzation agent is administered them, that's really for the benefit of those witnessing it. They want it to appear that it's a very calm type of death, that there is no pain and suffering involved. And, they do that for the witnesses. And unfortunately, that drug may wear off. And in his case, it did. So I could see him gasping for air, and the noises he was making and convulsing and everything as the potassium chloride was being administered, which the natural defense mechanisms kick in. The body doesn't. It tries to fight death, and then that's what you see. So it's not like just going to sleep. Not at all. When
you are faced with, watching the mortality of somebody else go out, how does, I'm assuming there's a group. Usually it looks like there's a couple of reporters, maybe family members of some of the victims. Are the family members of the killer or the person being put to death, are they allowed access to watch this as well?
There are, in the state of Ohio, there's 3 people allowed on each side. So the defendant gets to choose 3 people. And then on the state's side, they choose 3. Most of the time it's, the prosecutor or the victim's family, survivors, things like that. On the defendant's side, it's usually an attorney, clergy, and then myself. So we never come into contact with one another. We're only separated by a little partition, but there's 3 seats, a partition, and 3 more seats. The reporters are standing behind us at all times, the AP and anybody else locally or whatever, and they're usually taking notes of the witnesses as we're watching the execution take place.
Now, this is an updated edition of your book, correct?
Yes.
Okay. What kind of separates this book? And I believe we spoke to you about it when it originally came out around 2014 on our show. What differences and what things have you seen that have, that you kind of share in this book that might not have been around at the time the book was first released?
Sure. So there are other inmates that are in this book here, with letters from them inviting me to their execution when their date approaches. It talks about how Ohio has placed in a moratorium on the death penalty while the governor is in office right now because of trying to get the right type of drugs to use to put them to death. And then it also talks about how I've been invited and have gone to prisons everywhere from San Quentin to Ohio to Florida and all over, because now my inmates are all over the country. In fact, I was supposed to witness an execution in January of this year, which was Lisa Montgomery. She was the only female federal death row inmate, and she's the first one put to death, I think, in 70 years. And I was invited to that execution, but of course, the coronavirus stalled that out, and they still ended up putting her to death. But my experiences from before were only in Ohio, and now it's nationwide.
How did they even know to contact you and invite you to their death?
So it's kind of odd. I think what it is the respect that I show them by not selling them out when it comes to. So, for instance, I have probably 1,500, maybe 2,000 pieces of death row art just laying everywhere, stored underneath the beds and offices and everything. I've never sold a single piece of art. I've never sold letters, nothing like that. And so then when these, male and female inmates find out that I'm really there to study their behavior and not just one of those groupies that, will go out there and maybe bat their eyelashes or do whatever to, coax them into talking to them. They realize that I'm there, no nonsense. I joke with them. I talk to them like I would anybody else, but I treat them with respect. They treat me with respect. So then one inmate will give another inmate my name and number, and they just start reaching out to me, and that's how Scott Peterson reached out to me. I never reached out to him first. It was through other inmates that hey, he's a stand-up guy. You can trust him. Why don't you talk to him? And it just goes from there.
But to what end? Is it just that they want somebody to chronicle their last few moments? Is it is it kind of a braggadocious? I'm just having a hard time wrapping my head around. Geez, this week I'm going to be put to death. Final dinner, 3 McRib sandwiches, some sweet tea, and I should really invite Dr. Bill Kimberlin to this thing. I think he'd enjoy this. What's the concept behind having you there?
I think that they know that I'm researching, that I'm writing, and I think their hopes are that they won't be forgotten, that I'll write about them, that I'll put their artwork in a book or in a art gallery somewhere, things like that. It's just very weird. They just reach out to me, and I respond, I guess.
That's wow. That's powerful. You get Scott Peterson. This guy reaches out to you, murdered his pregnant wife, right? And allegedly, or I don't know if I'm supposed to say allegedly anymore now that he's been found guilty of it. But when you talk to Scott Peterson, what is that conversation like? I mean, he's still, as you said, defiant and claiming innocence throughout all of this. Do you think there's any possible way he may truly be innocent of this crime?
Boy, I respect the jury's verdict, and man, that's a tough question because he and I we talk a lot. When I went out to San Quentin a year or so ago to see a different serial killer, Scott's the one that drew up my itinerary for my wife and I on where to go, the best vineyards if we go up to wine country or Napa Valley and all over. He's that kind of a guy. He will talk a lot about his family and about Lacey and things like that. So I let him talk. I listen. I'll joke with him, but I never. I never really get into the specifics of his case because of it being under an appeal. And he's very guarded on that. And so I respect that while he's going through the appeal process. But he sends me his paintings and everything as well.
Is it hard to remain objective when you start to become friends? And I'm using the term friends very liberally here, but when you start to talk to these people and they're opening up to you and telling you, insights and the guy's writing up your itinerary for a visit, is it hard to stay objective regarding this type of case?
And not for me, because I always, remind myself that these guys are there for a reason. It's easier for me not to judge them harshly and, because some of my guys have done really, really horrible things when it comes to, raping and murdering kids and everything else. And I'll get the questions all the time. How can you sit across from them and eat with them and everything and not, show disgust? And quite honestly, I block that part out, knowing that they've never done anything to me or my family personally. So I can treat them on a professional level. And also I'm kind of in their environment. So I don't want to do anything because again, there's no handcuffs, there's no shackles when I'm talking to these guys. You're lucky to see a guard here and there, but that's it. So they have nothing to lose. And, if they wanted to end my life just as easily as they ended other ones, they could. So, I respect them. They respect me. And I try not to judge them in that way. And then when they're executed, I close that file up and I just try to block it out.
That's tough. I mean, it's especially, you see one, does it, and I don't mean to sound callous, but once you've seen one, does it get easier to see the others? Is there kind of that gallows, I don't want to say humor, but that kind of gallows effect that a lot of doctors, police, emergency workers get, that they're just so used to this now that it doesn't have the same kind of shock and awe moments?
Thankfully, no, that hasn't happened to me. And I say thankfully because if I ever become that desensitized to watching another human being dying or being put to death, then there's something wrong with me. But I have caught myself become desensitized to the number of murders when inmates will contact me. And, if they say, I've killed, 3 or 4, something like that. And in the back of my mind, I'm thinking only 3 or 4 when I've got, Samuel Little who killed like 86 or Charles Zane that I have to go talk to who's killed, 25. And I should never think that way, ever, because one human life is too many. And yet I've gotten, desensitized in that aspect. But when it comes to the executions, no, they're horrible. Those are the worst things to ever have to sit through and witness. And for people to sit there out there and say, "Oh, I could do that with no problem. I can, flip the switch or pull the trigger or whatever." I question their morality as well because that takes a toll on you no matter what.
What are some of the most impactful things that you've heard as they're facing that moment of mortality? I'm going to leave you with that question. We have to take just a quick break. We'll be back. Our guest today, Dr. Bill Kimberlin. The book is called Watch Me Die, Last Words from Death Row. You can find a link for it on today's program guide. So talking about the last words, Dr. Kimberlin.
Yes.
What are some of the variances? I mean, and I don't know if you can attach it to who said what, but what were some of the things that have been said that you were witness to, and what is it like to know you're literally hearing the last thing this person's ever going to say?
There was one time on death row for one of the guys, and we were able to order, food out from an Italian restaurant delivered to the prison. It was his last visitation. So he and we could walk up and down death row pod by ourselves for, 8 hours I got to spend with him that day. And he's like, man, Kimberlin, he's like, I can't believe it. They're going to put me to death in, the next day or so. He's like, I can't believe this day's actually come. And he's like, I was thinking, if I killed one more person, like right now, they couldn't put me to death the day after tomorrow, right? He said, because they would have to try me. And so there's no way they would be able to put me to death, right? And I'm looking around and I'm like, I'm the only person around.
Oh, geez.
There's no guard. We're walking around. There's no handcuffs. There's no shackles. We're just walking. So I'm like, no, you can't do that. They're going to try and abstent you anyways and put you to death. And the last thing you want to do is bring more shame and embarrassment onto your family. And he's like, Kimberlin, you're right. That's the reason why I have you here, to talk me down off the ledge. And I'm sitting there thinking to myself, I don't know where I came up with this, but, I'm glad I did, because it was something that certainly wasn't expected. So, that one made the hair stand up on the back of my neck. There was another one that I was literally, he was in the death cell right outside the death chamber. And we were talking, and I'm very, very cautious of what I say when I'm outside of the death cell, because there are 3 guards behind you at all times, and they're dictating everything that is being said, everything that's being done. And I like my conversations to be fairly confidential with these guys. So we were, discussing, the visit he had with his daughter and stuff, just previously. And then the next thing I know, the Supreme Court faxed over the final order denying his stay. And the guard handed it to him, and he's like, well, I guess it's time to die now, because they just denied it to me. You might as well take this. And he handed it to me. And he said, here's some pictures if you want these too. He said, I guess I have no use for them. And the next thing you know, the guard tapped me on the shoulder. He's like, it's time. So, it was just really odd to be laughing and joking with this guy and then have to turn around, go on the other side of the glass, sit down, and watch him die after I just had a conversation with him, less than 30 minutes ago.
Do you think it brings some peace to them in their last moments to see a friendly face staring at them through the glass?
Yeah, I think it does. He apologized because of the long drive I had to make to come watch him die and everything else. I mean, and that struck me as very odd, because I'm thinking, if I'm down to the final minutes of my life, I don't know if I would be worried about somebody making the trip, but that just goes to show you that, in their minds, they don't think like we do. There's something abnormal going on in their brains.
Right. The parts that they show regret for are very strange.
Very, they'll apologize if they swear in front of me, or, they'll write me letters asking me about my health and anything like that. And I'm sitting there thinking, why would you be concerned about that when you had no concern for the lives, multiple lives that you destroyed? But yet here they are, always checking up on me and making sure I'm okay and everything else.
Do most of these inmates find Jesus when they're facing those final days, or do you see kind of a mixture of, more defiant towards a God, religion, authority all the way through to the end? How does that work?
Yeah, it's, they don't become very spiritual or religious in my view that I see them as. They have convinced themselves, though, that they're going to heaven because they've been forgiven, and that's the reason why they won't kill themselves, because they don't want to risk that chance of going to heaven. So it's a very warped sense that they have of where they're going, or the afterlife and everything else. They'll compare their murders to anybody stealing a candy bar because the sin is a sin. And, over the years, they've convinced themselves that they've repented, and, they'll move on.
In the exchanges that you have with these killers, obviously the one when he's like, if I murdered somebody right now, I mean, that would be enough to make you sweat it. But have other prisoners been threatening or menacing to you or your family?
I wouldn't say threatening at all. I would say they, I had one guy that I'm supposed to witness his execution when it comes up, but, he told me flat out when I went to see him, he's like, the guards will let anybody in on death row, but we decide if you get to go home to your family or not, because this is really our house. And, those are words that you never forget, because when you're brought on to death row and you're in their house and their environment, they are in control, and you let them know that they're in control. And I've also learned over the years that any of the questions that they ask you personally, they already know the answers to. So you need to be open and honest with them. And I'll have them send, I've had things show up in the mail of like my wife's, mascot from where, she teaches, or, our son and daughter, our daughter's favorite singer, and my son's mascot where he goes to school, all painted on, canvas or drawn out without me ever telling them. And those are little hints that they know more about you than you have shared with them. So yeah, that's one of the reasons why I never really lie to them, and I show them that respect.
When one of these people is put to death after you've been conversing with them for quite a while, does it feel like you've personally suffered a loss? Like this is somebody that you knew and became friendly with, or are you able to stay disconnected on that aspect of it?
Yeah, I've never had any issues with disconnecting myself with them. Honestly, when they're put to death, that file is closed, and if I'm writing about them, I'll bring the files back out and things like that. But no, they never get to me on a friendly level to the point like, wow, I really miss talking to this one or that one or anything like that. No, I've never had those issues.
When you've got a book out like this, and obviously it's being passed around and you're hearing from killers, are there any that when you start to look into their cases, you're like, nope, I want nothing to do with this, I don't want to be there for that one? Or do you try to attend every one that you get the invitation to?
Out of respect, I try to attend the ones that I'm invited to. I've had a couple where, they've had stays of executions at the last moment. And in the back of your mind, or at least in my mind, I never know how to react or feel, because I'm thinking, okay, I made the arrangements to attend this. I took time off of work, blah, blah, blah. And then, there's a stay. Am I supposed to be happy for them, or, upset because I have to go through this all again? And those are very selfish things to think. But I'm human, so I think that way. But yeah, I mean, now there are inmates that will write me that I don't, correspond with or go and see or anything like that, because yeah, sometimes they're hoping to get money out of you for their story, or what can you do for me? And I'm not all about that at all. It's just this is what I do, and if you need some stamps, I'll send you stamps. If you're sending me art and you need some art supplies, I'll replenish those or whatever. But yeah, I don't, it's not like a business transaction with these guys. That's for certain.
What do you hope people can take away from reading a book like this?
I would hope more than anything that they can come to an educated opinion on their own, that after reading what death row is really like, what the inmates are really like from my experiences, that when somebody asks them if they are for or against the death penalty, they can have that educated decision or opinion that they come to based on what really does go on in an execution, what happens and transpires on death row. And again, I'm not advocating one way or the other. I just want the readers to be able to become educated in what the capital punishment process in the United States is really like.
Has it changed your stance at all on capital punishment?
I'd be lying if I said no. It has. It caught me off guard from the first time I walked onto death row, and some things never surprise me anymore with the way the process is handled. So yeah, I will say that it has opened my eyes wide to the lack of transparency that goes on, and the laws that are surrounding the process of protecting that capital punishment. And I just without giving my opinion, it's I come to it with a different point of view now. Yes.
I'm thankful there's somebody like you that is able to do these jobs and give people insight to this, but I certainly don't wish that was my career. And that's got to be a tough deal when you are dealing with these type of people and sitting in front of them and talking. I'd be remiss, since we also do an angle on the paranormal with our shows. Have you ever sensed there's something otherworldly, something driving this person aside from just mental illness?
I have come into contact with more than a few that I sit there and think to myself, they are really possessed with evil right down to the core, because the things that they have done and the things that they say, you can't be taught. There's something organically wrong with them, biologically wrong with them. And when they send me paintings made out of human blood and semen and everything else, you have to sit there and wonder what is going through their minds. The first guy that I witnessed get executed, he beat the inmate, his cellmate, to death, and drank his blood and masturbated all over him before the guards ever got there. And he said he was just so turned on by it. And he was very big into Satanism and just believed in all of that stuff. And to me, you can't teach somebody to do that. Something's wrong with them.
Do you think it's just bad wiring, or do you think that there truly is an evil influence on them then? And, possession, demonic, whatever you want to refer to it as.
If there was ever a case for somebody to be, demonic or possessed, it would have been Chris Newton. That's for certain. He was, worshipped the devil, believed in everything about it. And I just don't know how somebody like that would go through life where you could teach them that behavior. It's really bizarre. And I'd be curious to find out if all the artwork laying around, if it has bad spirits in it or not, because I have so much of it.
Have you ever, with that said, have you ever felt as though one of these spirits has visited with you, or that you've had that kind of contact?
My wife has, but not me. I'm not one to really subscribe to that, I guess. But but other people have felt that to the point where I have really good friends who, when they traveled to Rome and the Vatican, they brought back holy water and a cross that had been baptized with exorcism salts, and it sits in there. And then they wanted me to keep that in my room at all times, just to, have that to get rid of.
Ward off that bad spirit. Sure.
Yes.
Wow. Unbelievable. Watch Me Die. Last words from death row. Dr. Bill Kimberlin, our guest. Do you think that in your work that what you've been able to take away from talking to murderers and child rapists and just the most vile of the vile, do you think that has helped you in other aspects of your career when dealing with patients that are having strange predilections?
Yes. It's gotten me to not judge people so much, so quickly, that everybody has a backstory, and you don't always know what's going on, especially on the surface. So it's taught me a lot of patience. It's taught me a lot of respect for those that do suffer from mental illness. And it's opened my eyes, in a sense where the world that we live in isn't always rainbows and unicorns, that we do live amongst some really bad people out there, but not everyone is bad. And so I've learned a lot over the years, and I hope to continue to learn. The moment I stop learning is when I'm done with death row completely, and I'll get rid of all the art and everything else, because it's definitely not a hobby. It's not something that I would suggest other people do. There's no classes to take in college for it. I just happen to trip into that, that field and fall down that rabbit hole. But it changes a person, that's for certain.
Do you ever request the art from them, or do they just send it to you of their own volition?
Most of them just send it right to me. Other ones will, they'll say, hey, give me some ideas. I'm bored. So I like, 80s music and, things like that. And everybody has their different genre. So some will do really good portraits. Other ones are really good with the dark art. Other ones are really good with, I call it the Bob Ross style. And then there's guys that are just horrible all the way around. And they just send it to me. But no, I don't. I guess there's been a couple that have competed to try to do my book covers and things like that. So, they've done really well, painting, different, covers that I could use for books and things like that. But it's not like I commissioned them or anything like that. No.
Yeah, not that I thought you're like, all right, hey, Scott Peterson, could you paint me up a picture of what the murder scene looked like? I mean, I would understand that would not be something, but do they ever give you those insights in their paintings? Do they show you one of the murders that they committed?
They'll have hidden messages in the paintings. Some of them will tell me in letter form when they send the painting. And I might post those on social media, and I let the other experts look at it, because I have no idea what I'm looking at when I'm looking at this art. But sometimes I'll get 12, 15 paintings in 1 week, and it might take me a week or two to even open them. They'll be sitting on the dining room table until wifey's like, good Lord, are you going to open this stuff so I can toss it to the side or what? So, but yeah, I mean, some of them are very good artists. I did have the guy that when he drew me the maps to the bodies, I wanted to see how consistent he was a couple years later. So I asked him to paint them for me, and he did. And they matched up identical to the maps that he drew by hand years before. So again, the consistency's there. And that tells me that, again, those bodies are probably right where he said they are.
Fascinating stuff. The book, again, we have a link for it on today's website. If people wanted to reach out to you, not as murderers, but as, to kind of support your work and such, what's the best website for them to visit?
the book is published through Wild Blue Press. They have a website on there. Also, I'm on Instagram and Facebook under Bill Kimberlin. There's a couple of us on there. I think I mentioned once before the other guy I'm friends with. His name's Bill Kimberlin, but his best friend's like Sir Richard Branson. So definitely not me.
Okay.
But I'm on social media.
Nice. Sure.
So and I try to answer everybody's questions. If they instant message me or anything like that, I try to get back to everyone.
One last question. Do the victims' families ever reach out to you saying, you're talking to Scott, can you ask him this? Or you're talking to Bill, can you ask him that? Is there any of that aspect going into the work that you do? In Sandusky, where I was born and raised, Ohio, there was an inmate that I was at his sentencing for, Curtis Clinton, and he did some really horrible crimes, raped and killed the mother and both of her little babies, and was placed on death row. And I knew both the victims' families and the defendants' families. So I never spoke to him in person, since he was placed on death row, because I didn't want to get involved in that. But I'll be contacted by the victims' family members once in a while. I was just a couple weeks ago wanting to know if I knew anything about his death sentence or anything like that. So, and again, those are the ones I feel so bad for, because they're living their life waiting to see him die. And that's not much of a life either. Agreed. Very, very strange. Well, Dr. Kimberlin, it's great to catch up with you again, and thank you very much for giving us this insight to our listeners. The second edition book is out and available now. Find a link for it on today's program guide. For those of you that are subscribers to the premium Stitcher program and listening to the full show, we've got Dumb Crimes, Stupid Criminals coming up next. For those of you that are not, thank you for tuning in and spending some time with us here on True Crime Tuesday. We hope you enjoyed today's program of True Crime Tuesday. And remember, if you'd like the full episode with the Dumb Crimes, Stupid Criminals aspect, all you have to do is go over and subscribe now for Stitcher Premium. Use code word Darkness Radio, all one word, to get some deep discount savings for your 1-year subscription, and it will give you access to all of our archives from Darkness Radio. There's over 1,000 episodes up and available, and more being added constantly. You get all of the episodes of True Crime Tuesday, and you get all of the other great programs that are part of Stitcher. Hundreds of thousands of hours of programming for $5 a month, commercial free. You can't beat that, so don't even try. Go subscribe now, and remember to use keyword Darkness Radio for those key savings.